Well, I think there would be an argument that this is a fixed penalty notice and a sanction as opposed to a conviction. It's not good optics. It's quite clear from the standards in professional life and the ministerial code that ministers and the Prime Minister are supposed to act above reproach. So the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer receiving criminal sanction specifically at a time which sacrifices were asked of the population as a whole, it just doesn't look good for the trust in politics, the trust in state and the democracy, and it doesn't look good for the sort of political futures of those people involved.
And so Mr. Johnson came out last night in his statement apologising, saying it didn't occur to him at the time that what he was doing was against the rules. Is that a plausible argument in your view for the Prime Minister who helped to make the rules, saying it didn't occur to him that what he was doing was against them?
It seems entirely implausible to me. I suppose I'm not his chief audience, though. The audience that Boris Johnson is speaking to when he makes this is his backbench MPs. Now, it's pretty clear that Boris Johnson is not or will not resign over this issue. However, the Conservative backbench MPs will be getting heat in their inboxes and perhaps via their mailboxes as well. Who knows? Some people maybe still write actual letters. They'll be getting a lot of heat from this. They can put in letters of no confidence to the 1922 committee. So I suppose what he's trying to do here is, because there are two layers to this offence, and this applies both to Boris Johnson and to Rishi Sunak. Both of them in the House of Commons had said that no parties had occurred, or if there were parties, they were not at them. The criminal sanction, which they've received, says otherwise. So consequently, it is absolutely quite clear that misleading Parliament is, if you are found to be misleading Parliament, you should either correct the record first off, or then second of all, you should tender your resignation to the Prime Minister. So I suppose, bearing in mind, we can be pretty certain that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak aren't going to do this at the moment. What he's speaking to is he's trying to qualm some of the concerns of backbench MPs who think that he may have misled parliaments. This does not seem plausible to me, but I'm not the person whom this is directed at.
Okay, and what do you think the mood on the backbenches is like at the moment? Have things calmed down? I know a couple of months ago, things were a little bit more heated and there was more concern. Have things calmed down a bit? And will this fine sort of reignite the kind of the feeling against Boris Johnson that there seemed to be before?
Well, there's a lot in this. First off, yes, a lot of the initial heat has been taken off the situation. There's been a sort of a whipping moment, trying to get people who had submitted letters to retract them. However, a lot of MPs have said that they would wait to see if the police issued a caution, or what the Sue Gray report in all this, of course, Sue Gray report. Secondly, Ukraine cost of living crisis are issues which are being raised by a number of Conservatives. That Harold Macmillan famously said a week is a long time in politics, and I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 weeks have passed since the last one. So that said, Conservative MPs will be in their constituencies over Easter. They will speak to people, especially MPs in marginal constituencies will be speaking to constituents. So they will get a lot out of this. But there's another big issue, I think, to this story, is that it seems clear that the police are working chronologically through the various alleged parties. The fact that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have received the fixed penalty notices specifically for Boris Johnson's birthday party does not mean necessarily that that is the end of the story. It might well be that further ones are to come, or it might not be. So this issue isn't going away for Boris Johnson, because there is going to be other fixed penalty notices, perhaps in the future, for he or members of his staff. And then, of course, we've got the small matter of the final publication of the Sue Gray reports when all of this is taken care of. So it's not something which is going to vanish if Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak manage to survive the next week or so.
And what about the opposition? Because I think pretty much all the opposition parties yesterday were calling for him and Rishi Sunak to resign. They obviously haven't yet, but what other options remain open to the opposition parties to put pressure on them?
Well, I suppose from a parliamentary perspective, Boris Johnson can consider himself lucky that the parliament is in recess, and that means to doesn't have to face an immediate prime minister's question time. I mean, it's fair to say that in previous statements on the issue, Boris Johnson has been on the back foot and he's managed to avoid that. There's various parliamentary techniques. The opposition parties can put in a vote of no confidence. It's probably not a particularly good idea, because it's one of these things which is unlikely to succeed. And secondly, nothing will unite the Conservative Party more than being attacked by the Labour Party. So effectively speaking, I suspect that the opposition parties in this position is that whatever one thinks about what Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak should do as a result of these fixed penalty notices, no one thinks that they've come out well as a result of this. And it might well be that it's one of these situations which sort of said, you quite clearly said this in Parliament, and yet this is saying something else, and build up towards the next big test, of course, for Boris Johnson, which is the local elections in May. And that might also sway the hand of a number of Conservative MPs.
Okay, and what about the obviously one of the big changes, as you mentioned briefly earlier, since the heat was on a few weeks ago, is of course the war in Ukraine, and a lot of Boris Johnson's supporters and admirers have raised that as a reason to keep him. Has that in a way come at a good time for him?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, it gets people. I mean, Partygate was the focus of politics for a number of weeks, and of course, the situation in Ukraine has altered the focus. So to a certain extent, it's been to Boris Johnson's benefits. One shouldn't over-egg the pudding on this, though. However, I mean, fundamentally, what this fixed penalty notice has led people to question is judgment at the heart of government and honesty at the heart of government. And in a situation whereby a conflict is going on in Europe, this might also ask people to question, is this the right leadership for this crucial moment in the country's history? So it's certainly the situation in Ukraine, and of course the cost of living crisis and the various other things have altered the focus on politics. So Partygate is not the only sort of political story in town. But again, a week is a long time in politics. There might be more fixed penalty notices. We've got the Sue Gray report to come. So it's possible that the focus will come back onto the Prime Minister.
Okay, and if we could maybe just briefly talk about the Chancellor specifically, because he's had a tough couple of he was already having a tough couple of weeks as it was, and then this came along yesterday. There was all sorts of rumours yesterday that he might fall on his sword. He eventually didn't, and of course he's widely rumoured to be keen on the top job himself. Where do you think all of this leaves his long-term future?
Well, I suspect that Rishi Sunak will be grateful of the holiday week on to reflect on his position, because, I mean, if one casts oneself back to the chief element of Partygate, then Rishi Sunak was regarded as being given lukewarm support for the Prime Minister, and maybe he was biding his time for a prime ministerial bid. Then the issues around about his green card in America and the non-dom status of his wife and the financial affairs put a scupper on that. There was also perhaps heavy rumours, perhaps, is that he was being briefed against by other Conservative Party members to get to that position. And then this fixed penalty notice came along, and you know, would this be an opportunity for him to resign on a matter of principle in order to put pressure on Boris Johnson? But you know, he who wields the dagger seldom wears the crown. I should know which Shakespeare play that's from, but I'm afraid I don't. If one is considering a leadership bid, you've got to be certain to know when to move. Perhaps Rishi Sunak's moment has gone. I suspect that he will spend the bank holiday weekend sort of examining where he is and where he sits in politics at the moment.
Okay, and perhaps finally then just a word, going back to the Prime Minister then, where does this all leave his long-term future?
Well, it's hard to say it because one doesn't precisely know what Conservative MPs are going to do. I mean, certainly when we haven't seen the end of the fixed penalty notices and the police involvement in this situation, and we still have the Sue Gray reports to come within the Ukraine crisis, you can understand why Conservative MPs will use this to buy time to consider this. I strongly suspect that whether or not Boris Johnson goes as a result of this, if he loses a vote of no confidence in the next sort of 3 or 4 months, it seems to me that the chances of Boris Johnson leaving the Conservative Party into next general election have become vanishingly small. That said, in order for you to have a different person leading the Conservative Party into the next general election, you do actually have to have a vote of no confidence and pick a new leader. And at some point, the Conservative Party will have to move on that if they decide they want a new leader.